Hi, Brenda. It's Angie here. Of course, you know who I am. And I'm here today with three of my lovely students that work with me here in the Queer Resource Center and Amherst. And I've just finished up reading the rest of the Kivel book around You Call This a Democracy. I know this is one of your favorite books ever. What I've been talking a little bit is that with my students around wealth and like what is actually money and what is income and how do we talk about that and how does that impact us. But I'm going to have them first introduce themselves to you, and then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion, and then we'll go from there.
Hi, my name is Amira, and I'm a sophomore here at Amherst.
My name is Lyndon, and I'm a junior here.
My name is Naya, and I'm a first year.
Great. So, one of the things that we were just talking about is when we talk about money, that what we tend to talk about is income. And so, this idea of like what income is and what wealth is, why is it that we always go directly to the idea of income, right? And so, I just lost what I was going to say. What else did I say? Let me just pause that. Good thing. All right, so we're back. Sorry about that. So this idea that we talk about what money is and where does actually wealth come from and why does it actually matter? And so one of the questions that we were actually just discussing is this idea of passing on wealth. And so if maybe each one of you would be willing to talk a little bit about like how you access wealth and how your own families have passed on that wealth to you. And so what does it mean in addition to attend an elite institution like Amherst College? Whoever wants to go.
Well, I guess like my experience with wealth is a bit different than most people here. There's kind of been an interruption, I guess, in the tradition in my family, given the Cultural Revolution. For example, my father's side, his family owned like this toothpaste factory and was considered like the second most wealthy family in China before the Cultural Revolution ever happened. But when the Cultural Revolution came, all the money was taken away. They were like labeled as capitalists and put away on the bottom of society. And so after my parents made the exodus to the U.S., they came here with like $40 each in their pockets, and they have made their own way of living. And it's kind of remarkable, like where they've come today. But they've kind of perpetuated this sort of philosophy toward making your own money. Although I do come from like that sort of economic standing, the way that they treat me is that they want me to be like, making most of my money, like they'll probably like 90%. They'll help sometimes when it's exceptionally needed, or if I will promise to pay them back. But they have never really given me something with no like tag or some sort of condition to it.
Great.
I feel like my family is definitely like the exact opposite, except like we kind of the same thing. Both my parents are immigrants, so they both came like very poor, and they're, I guess I don't know class wise where we are, but we're like kind of middle-ish somewhere. But like there have definitely been times where like money has been tight, but despite that, my parents constantly like funnel money into me and like always like. They're always trying to be like, you know, if you ever need anything, I don't want you to ever feel as though like you're different from your peers, because I know you're going to a very rich school, and I was in private school like for my whole life, and they're like, we don't want you to feel any different. But I've always been conscious of that and like actively tried not to spend money, and like by getting this job, like I've completely like stopped depending on my dad for like money. So
Great.
Yeah, I definitely feel that as well. In terms of my parents, I think they follow a lot of, well, not a lot of, I guess, in some ways, the pattern of Black American middle class or Black American upper middle class of, you know, sort of being the generation that was the first one to be college educated, and that sort of being the key to their economic success. So they were both of them were the first ones to go to college on either side, and then they both went to law school. And I think in their eyes, a lot of that, one, they knew that, you know, they had to go into a work that would be able to provide for them financially, and like to make them like make sure that they were secure economically, but also they felt like because they were coming up in a time that was like during the Black Power movement and stuff like that. So they also wanted to do it in a way where they felt like they weren't, like selling out or selling out to the man or whatever. So they both became civil rights lawyers. So to find like that middle ground. So I don't know. I guess it's interesting to see the ways that like they talk about, like, oh, we could have, sometimes we could have, thought about being like corporate lawyers or whatever, and like actually like making like a lot of money and like spending a lot of time in the office and like, and like being like actually like, getting to that upper class, especially within the Black community. But they felt like it was more important for them to do something important with their work than to be like super upper class. So I think for them, it was first and foremost important for them to provide like a stable environment for my brothers and I. So so that always meant going to like private schools and stuff like that, even though we were on financial aid. But like, so they saw through their education, they were like, this is the most important step for you. So education was always first. So it was like, regardless of anything else that's going on, we need to make sure that you're getting a good education. So that has definitely framed my idea of what I need to do. But also I think that in them sort of attaining a certain social class, they've allowed me to have a little bit of breathing room, and I'm able to sort of be like, oh, like I want to work at a nonprofit. I want I want that chance to like to do whatever, like to do something for the greater good, and not necessarily think about financially, that financial aspect in the same way that they had to, because they gave me that opportunity. So
Right. So part of what Kaivel talks about is within like the idea of passing on your wealth, is that passing on your wealth is is that it means that there's an educational path. And so Naya, you talked about this idea of like you've been going to private schools, right, since you were young. And that's very much a like ruling class structure, is to send your kids to private schools, then eventually to an elite university, similar to Amherst College, and then they go into the corporate managerial world as well, right? And so they continue to pass on the wealth of what that looks like. Now, one of the things I do want to bring attention to is that typically what Kaivel talks about is that the structure is maintained within like very wealthy, privileged communities and families, mostly being white families. And so, as all of you three identifying as like people of color in some capacity, how did your parents talk to you about wealth and the continuation of your education to access that wealth, right? Because the idea is that wealth is something that the white man has. So it's something that we want. And so how does it like culturally, how does that get translated, right? So you talked about this, Amir, like your mom and dad are like, we want you to do this because this is what you're going to get when you get out of there, right? We do that now. And even like the other readings that I've been reading, like Suzanne Farr talks about this a lot too. And this idea of like we, as people, we want to access the greater, which basically means we want the privilege. And so therefore, we're also, in many times, willing to give up the power that we currently have. So that means to become more either further marginalized and or be the subordinate in order and under the assumption that eventually we will make it to the top, right? And so we start our way at the bottom. It's supposed to be like you get your way at the bottom and you work your way up. And that is not necessarily the structure in which Kaivel operates under, because he states that these people already start at the top. Right? Because they already come in with privilege, because some of these privileges are inherent and they're not always just given to you. And so, but yeah, so I guess this idea of like culturally as, like families of color, how did your parents talk to you about accessing wealth and like sending you to college? Like when they say you're going to go to college, like, did you say I'm going to go to college, or were they like, you're going to college because this is what you're going to get? Because when you go to college, you get this. Like, what did that conversation look like? Sure.
I think it was interesting for me because I grew up on a street. Well, my parents bought a house like 30 years ago, and so at the time it was a completely Black neighborhood, mostly working class, and so my parents were probably the only ones that actually owned a house. Everybody else was like renting, or leasing or whatever, and so as they kept the house in the span of the 30 years, they sort of gained more wealth, and so there was sort of this dichotomy of us being like, like we're the lawyer family in the in the middle class, like working class neighborhood, but it was still like everybody was black, so it was sort of that dynamic of, yes, everybody is sort of going through a similar experience, but we still have that privilege. So that I guess that played out a lot, even as I was younger. We would talk about it in terms of education through, me going to private school and the rest of my friends going to public school. And the public schools in Oakland are notoriously not good. So it would be a conversation of, why am I not doing what my friends are doing? Why am I not, why am I not in the same situation that they're in? And that was, the place where they would stress the importance of education and the fact that I had the privilege to go to this school and that this was going to lead me to the later goals in life that would, you know what I'm saying?
Well, and get you into a place like Amherst College, right? Because most of the students that actually attend Amherst College went to some type of private and or boarding and or prep school, and most of them did not attend public institutions. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm like really diametrically opposed to everyone here in sort of my background. I went to public school entirely from K through 12, but I guess it's like a little exceptional of a case because LAUSD in general is notorious for also being very bad because California has like one of the most lacking education systems because it's just very huge. But Manhattan Beach has its own little unified school district, and it's a really small bubble. It's like a microcosm basically. And there's just a lot of parental donors that can help subsidize the public education system. And still yet there is a lot of public cuts going around, and it follows a trend of the state education system, but it's not impacted as much as anywhere else. So it's kind of an unreal situation.
Well, and public schools are funded by the taxes within those particular communities, right?
Yeah.
So if you have people who have access to financial income, wealth in that way, right? Then that's going to the taxes. The taxes goes
and
to
on the ballots for multiple for the presidential or just state elections, there were a lot of measures that were put up to vote to inject more money into the from your taxes and into the public education system.
Right.
Although, I guess my parents knew that, I would still have a chance to get into a good school from this public school, although, the SWAT of people don't. But because it is a highly competitive high school, people still do get in. But I guess my experience, really contrasted from my brothers who went to Exeter for high school. And my mom, and I applied there, I got in. But my mom really urged me not to because for some reason she thought that I really couldn't take it, or it just wasn't the right fit for me, and I'm actually kind of glad that she did because I really do appreciate the experience that I got in a public school. And yeah, but my parents have always kind of taken education obviously as the first thing, despite not trying to, I guess, spoil me with any sort of financial support in other spheres. Education is a promise I'll always make. So I have a college fund that is I can't even say the number, it's obscene, but it's only to be used for education. It's custodial, so they have complete control over it. And they've guaranteed that even if I want to go to any grad school, they'll pay for it fully. So yeah, and when it comes in terms of education and these institutions, they're fully supportive. But in terms of the other aspects of life, they really want to emphasize this philosophy of making it yourself and having this Chinese work ethic that I guess they were brought up with, and that the Cultural Revolution kind of oppressed them with. So my parents are very, very exceptionally hardworking individuals, and I'm actually kind of impressed by what they've been able to achieve in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's